Hello, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michaela Madrid, and I'm a member of the Lower Brule Lakota Sioux tribe, and I'm on staff here at Sovereign Bodies Institute. Tonight, we're going to be continuing our Meet the Survivor series, and we're so honored to have survivor leader Alaya McIvor here with us. There will be an opportunity to ask loving and respectful questions. So, for those of you tuning in on the live stream, please post your questions in the comments of the live video and we will do our best to get to them. So with that, I'll pass it over to Alaya to introduce yourself.
And welcome everybody. Good evening, good day, whatever day it may be for you right now, during the day or whatever time of day it is for you. First and foremost, I think I just like to acknowledge my spirit names, she who collects medicine for the people and she who works from the heart for the people. I come from the Lynx clan. My name is Alaya McIvor. I am a survivor of child sexual exploitation, human trafficking. I originate from Canada. I am from the lands of the Treaty 1 territory tonight where I come from and where I'm gathered on and coming live from. I just want to, before I dip right into it, just let the audience know what you're about to hear, not only here, but about to envision. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that I'm in a good place before where I was at in my life, and that I do not blame my family, nor do I blame folk who took part in where I was at that time in my life. But what I do is I expect that people learn from the wrongs and try and right them, whichever capacity they're in moving forward when working and helping in the helping field. So first and foremost, I'd also like to acknowledge that I come from a mother of 7. I'm a single mother who tried her best to raise us as best as she can. I acknowledge my mom. She is my rock. She is my hero. But also, I like to acknowledge all of those people who walk alongside me day by day in helping me pursue a better life. So I'm going to share with you, I'm going to get very raw with you, but not get too in detail, but I want to kind of bring you to a point where you see yourself reflected in me in some way, shape, or form, but also learn through the process of what I'm about to share with you. So I just want to go back to when I was a child, because I personally believe that everything roots from when you were a child, moving forward, especially becoming or being a survivor of sexual exploitation, human trafficking, child sexual exploitation. So just like to move back to when I was young, so as far as I can remember, my mom always tried to do the best that she can as a single mother and provide for me and my siblings, and did the best that she can. I acknowledge her and I lift her up for that, being a single mother. But moving through the duration of my life, as far as I can remember, we never really lived in our First Nations community. I'm a First Nations, and I come from a First Nations community in Manitoba, which would be a reservation, a tribal community. We really never grew up living on the First Nations community up until I was about 4 or 5 that I could remember. But one of the memories I have is when we were moving into the community that my mom continuously tried and survived to help us live comfortably as possible. But even though our families try and survive and thrive, there's still situations that occur that our families aren't aware of. So moving into the community was sort of different because we never really knew who all our family was, but we were surrounded by family. So I just want to go into, because we only have so much time, I don't want to go in detail and victimize and re-traumatize folk. So one of the things I can remember how it all started was about 6 or 7 years old, visiting a friend whom I thought was a friend, and not only was I visiting, I was to spend a weekend at that friend's house. And that's when my life really shifted and changed. During my time at my friend's house, I was, abused. I was taken, dragged down the hallway, kicking and screaming, my childhood stolen away from me. That's when my life changed. I became I became this person that was ugly within myself because I let that happen, and only that, but allowed it to happen. Sometimes I get a little bit emotional about it, but I know that isn't my fault. That is that individual's fault that perpetuated that violence towards me at that time. So I let that sit with me, and one of the things that sat with me for a number amount of years was the individual telling me if I was ever to disclose the information of that occurrence, that me and my family would be murdered, and he would assure of that. So that always stuck in the back of my head up until I was 18 years old when I shared that for the very first time. So in relation to that, I would become very moody, not moody, but I would continuously find ways to to fight with my siblings, and fighting was just normal in our household with siblings, coming from a big family. So that had happened through the duration. One of the things as a young child is what I learned was confidentiality was a must, and from that day on forward, I confidentiality really stuck with me, and I held that on for a number amount of years because it always played in the back of my head. So I don't want to really focus on that piece, but I want to move forward. So I, would fight with my siblings. We never got along. My mom always tried the best that she could, but I was just too much at one point. And the only thing she knew was child and family services. And at that time, I was about 11 years old. And I was just acting out violently, I guess. And she had an option to give me to child and family services, which she did. I don't blame her as a single mom. Which her intent was they would help me navigate a way of understanding, not only understanding, but giving me proper resources that she couldn't give as a mother, a single mother. So I was given to family within my community. Was reunited on my 12th birthday with my family. That didn't last for so long. And again, the fighting came, the misunderstanding of, my life, and my mom just couldn't deal with it. She's like, bringing me back to see it fast. And at that time, I was, I wanted to take my life. I didn't want to go with child and family services within my community. I just didn't want it. I was done. The only option that I seen that was viable for me was to commit suicide. I tried to commit suicide, and that's probably one of the last times. One of the last times I really tried to succeed in committing suicide, because I hung there on the tree and the tree broke, and I kind of realized that it wasn't my time to probably go. Get myself up, and was given an option from my child and family services worker. And that option was to stay with people that I didn't want to stay with in my First Nations community, or go to Winnipeg. And because Winnipeg, where I live now, is somewhere that was always fascinating, fast paced in the city life with lots of lights, I chose Winnipeg. And within a matter of a 24-hour period, she was able to obtain a Greyhound ticket, which was on a Greyhound bus. And within a 24-hour period, I was being put on a greyhound, and was told from my child and family service worker never to come back home. And 12 years old, you think you know the world, you think you have the world in your hand, and that you're off, to start a different life. I arrived at the bus depot, nobody receiving me on the other end, and instantly I was groomed. I was groomed. I was, sought out from an individual, and I can honestly picture this male today standing there, Alaya man, full of gold jewelry, you know, luring me, getting my attention, and it's something that I've never had. It's something that my family couldn't give me. That attention that's that attention that I was seeking and needing. And I was so vulnerable, so gullible. I followed him and he told me where to go. And he left and got into his car and was luring me to a place where he felt that was safe for me to go and for him to pursue in taking advantage of me. And at 12 years old, I was so naive, coming from a First Nations community, very shocked, the culture shock, not only the culture shock, but, moving from a First Nations community into a city setting, just shock all around and feeling that, oh, somebody's looking at me, somebody's actually paying attention to me. I got into the vehicle and for hours I performed oral sex on the guy, and I was, I was performing on him for hours, and then after he was done with me, I was pretty much just tossed aside and was given $5 and was told to go into this coffee time at that time on the corner of Princess at Notre Dame. And at that time, I left left the community with 2 white bags, and I didn't have a suitcase. I didn't have the things that people use when they travel. I was opening the coffee door because he said, "Go get us 2 coffees," and I was like, "Okay." And then there he was driving off, and I just thought that was really normal, and it was really normalized at that time. And I was like, "Okay, well, he gave me this much money. Maybe this is just normal from my perspective as a young youth." I said, "Well, maybe this is it. Maybe I need to go back to where he got me." And I made my way back there and would, continuously, service men that obviously knew that as a child needed protection, but they didn't see it that way. What they seen was they're getting their sexual desires fulfilled from someone that was obviously naive and really vulnerable. So that's what had occurred, and at 12 years old was my first time using hard drugs, which was crack cocaine, and I became addicted to drugs really quick, very fast, and that would just spiral into a whole spew of things, and that would go on and on for a number amount of years. Nobody really knew. I would go back there and I would go online. And one of the things back then, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Instagram, there wasn't these platforms as there is today. But just back then, it's similar in nature to what it is today, though. So back then, it was dial-up computer, Yahoo chat sites, MSN Messenger, which is basically Facebook Messenger now. I found ways on, how to, maneuver myself in those chat rooms and not understand that I was prey to a bunch of men in those rooms that were actually seeking to victimize young people that were just naive, that I just thought, I was getting all this attention, and I would move to that road for a number of years, but that just got too much after a while because already I was full-fledged in the addiction, and throughout the duration, drugs just became my norm, and it was so normalized. It was like so glorified, glamorized with that lifestyle at that time, not understanding the amount of abuse that I was suffering each time that I was, pursuing, not only pursuing, but acting out those individuals' desires, not understanding the consequences that would, eventually, um, impact me in a way years later. So that would go on, and um, I just didn't even give, didn't didn't care for myself. It was the life was too fun, too good at that time. I'm not realizing for years, and so that I went into the visual street-based sexual exploitation, where I was now very visible within our communities, and I didn't even care what people thought. I was actually invisible. That's what I thought I was. I was invisible at that time to everybody. And um, I would glamorize and glorify that life so much so that I didn't see myself as a victim, nor did I see myself exploited, nor did I see myself as someone in need of protection. I didn't see myself there at that time because I was so entrenched in that life. And during that time, I became homeless and been homeless quite often in my life. And when you're homeless and don't have a place to go, it's just, it just goes hand in hand. And when you're servicing, men for the sole purpose of them getting their needs met, um, it's just obvious that you're going to be using drugs and be victimized. A lot of people don't look at it as being victimized at that point. I never did. So looking at it from the perspective of today, where I'm not there anymore, and it's victimization all around, and being victimized to a global crime. I then would move in with people. I had places at times myself, rented places, but I had too much pride that I would go to social assistance at times, or I'd be getting kicked out of places because I couldn't pay my rent. I was addicted, full-fledged addicted to addictions, or what addictions is. And started just couch surfing. I live out of 2 white bags again, and would stay from this place to this place. And one of the things I never knew was people wanted me to stay with them during this time because they, instead of seeing me as a human being that was breathing, someone that deserved love, someone that deserved food, someone that deserved better, they see me more as how are they going to benefit financially off of me? How are they going to get their needs met from victimizing me on those streets? So I never seen that. I just thought they were my friends. Today I call them acquaintances, associates, people who taught me a lot after the fact. So I would stay here and stay there, and people would be fighting, and it just became a really ugly scene. I would be out there 7 days a week, 365 days a year, sometimes 7 days, sometimes 10 days without sleep, up and down the streets in stilettos, and just didn't care overall. And there's certain times I remember, I remember in -50 below weather, I was out there, I had frostbite on my nose, my ears, my belly, and the top of my legs, from wearing next to nothing in -50, and being put out there only to be, robbed from those people that supposedly were my friends. And I went back out there and just lived that life over and over and over again, and was sought out from folks for my vulnerability, because I didn't have love. There was a breakdown in family relationship, and that dynamic really put me in a place where I was so vulnerable and didn't even know it. If somebody showed me affection, I would attach to them in some sort, in some way, somehow, because I was longing that. I never had that, right? And I was never shown that. And I was in the hotel room, and all I was fed was drugs, and that was one of my first times, my first times being picked up in traffic, and all the dates arranged for me, and I was able to get away from that incident weeks later, only to go back to the streets and then go through that whole cycle again. um, yeah, it just lasted for a long time, and it would just repeat itself. And during that duration of that time, there was times I was kept in apartments for 2 to 3 days servicing a man or someone and being violently beaten while the person was using drugs. So there's a lot of times when after that, I would run from point A to point B because I felt the presence of the individual around me at all times. There were a lot of times I should have been murdered, I should have been missing. And I always look back at those times, and those are some of the hardest times in my life. That I think I really thank our ancestors for walking alongside me during those times and keeping me safe. You know, you know, after one of those times being kept in an apartment block, after one of those times being kept in an apartment block, I was only pushed out to go do it all over again. And again, was seen as, a source of income, and people seen that, and then I was taken, and then I went to BC, jumped on a Greyhound, and it just went all over again, the cycle, and I was taken, we went to Vernon, from Vernon I was shipped out on to the Okanagan area, up to Duncan, British Columbia, off the mainland, the downtown east side, Vancouver, Kelowna. I was shipped all over the place, and I remember at one point in my time, I tried to escape, and I was being taken to a trailer park, and I remember there's two guys in the front, and I was in the back, and I was so messed up. I was always messed up, and I had tried to escape. I actually rolled out of the back of the car. I opened the door. They didn't even know until they got to that trailer park that I rolled out of the car. So I opened the door and I rolled out, and I went rolling into the ditch, and it was scary. I had to literally stand there and wait for them to come back because I was so frightened. Trees were like 100 feet tall, and I didn't know where I was going. I just had to stand there and take it and go back and do it all over again. And I was able to get away. In 2004, I came back, only to go back to it again. At this time, I started seeing some sort of a light of some sort at that, and started thinking ahead. Before, I never thought ahead. I was so entrenched in that life that there was no looking forward, no future, no nothing. It was just living that day, getting, really messed up and servicing a bunch of people and servicing people's needs rather than my own. Not even, taking care of my body and my, not eating, not drinking, just it was like I was a machine, rather than a human being, a machine that just, like a robot. That's how I was treated. And was able to get away and come back, only to do it all over again, but I started seeing at the end of it, and after that time, in around 2004, I came home, and then we had lost my best friend, Divas Belange, that at the end of the summer that year, and that really messed me up because we were both homeless and couch surfing, and I was pretty devastated. It really devastated me, and I lost her, and I was the one that drew flags nobody knew that she was missing, and I went to a safe house that we had utilized. It was a place that we actually lived under their steps at one point in time. Um, at the safe house, and I had asked them, has anybody seen Divas? Has anybody seen her? I haven't seen her in a week. It's not like her. And there was so much speculation of she went back to her First Nations community. She went to BC. I was like, no, it's not like her. And yeah, the last time I seen her, she had walked with a couple of associates or acquaintances, and that was the last time I had seen of her. And that really devastated me because I lost my best friend. And I was like looking through a haystack trying to find your best friend, and you can't find your best friend. And it took a week for them to report her missing. And during that time, I was like, what is going on? What is going on? But prior before that, we lived with Tatiana Irma in this rooming house. So I think it went Divas, Tatiana, and I thought it was me next who would go missing. And it's like, is there like somebody out to kill us? And this is before the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls Two-Spirit was as big as it is today and at the forefront, and not only the forefront, but talked about. So at that time in 2004, I was like, something's going on here. My best friend's missing, and I just went off the deep end, and I was like, I needed to find her, but I couldn't find her because the only way I could find her was continuously being out there, right? And it took about 40 days, being out there. Finally, somebody came with news, and I remember sitting, and I was about to start using, and the program manager walks to the door, and she's like, I have bad news, and I just couldn't take it, and I had got up and walked out and went back out, and this was probably like 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was like, why did you go? And standing on the corner and not even understanding, um, that I loved her, she was my best friend, and somebody had to take her, and I was so lost that I would get into every car for a little while after that and ask them if they were going to kill me, and if they were going to, can you just do it now? That was at the point where I was at that time. I just totally lost hope, and yeah, and little did I know, with every person that had picked me up in my life and had victimized me. I actually know their face, and I know them to detail. And little would I know that I would be actually what they would call a dangerous witness to Davis's case. So the guy had come back, came and picked me up before, during, and after this, and I didn't know, but deep in my heart, something told me that I needed something, and shared information with the RCMP detective. And one of the things, because we were looked at as prostitutes at that time rather than humans, that people didn't want to hear us. People didn't want to understand us. People just thought we were just a problem rather than, human. We were just a problem to society, that we were just garbage. And there was a lot of things that really stuck out with this one particular guy that had picked me up, and I narrowed it down from all the men that would purchase us, and it came down to 3 to 4 of them, and he was one of them in the long run. And the guy was later on found guilty and is facing life in jail. He has a chance of taking parole, I think this year or next year, so I have to live with that personally. But overall, we were able to, years later, after years later, find someone responsible for taking my best friend. But in 2004, I was still lost, and it would just lead on. In 2007, I started seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, that I didn't want to be a victim, be victimized and serviceman for the rest of my life. That I started wanting out. I started wanting better, but I was so entrenched, and so wrapped around in that life. I actually went to a woman in a safe house. I remember I was sober for a couple months and went into a safe house and just seen the same safe house that we used to sleep under their step. And I walked in sober, and there's a lady who lost her kids sitting there, and it was just a domino effect. She was like, I lost my kids, and she was crying, and I was like, you should take her into an office and you know, let her cry, but don't let her cry in a calm area, because you're gonna, make a domino effect, and everybody's going to feel it, and you're gonna have a big, a big room full of people, you know, with a lot of trauma. They didn't listen to me, and I then at that time knew right then and there that those people weren't really caring for the best of our needs. So I seeked out the staff in that building, and there was only two of them actually. I went into her office and I was like, is there anything that we can do? Is there any money that we can apply for so we can start bettering the lives of these women? And it's like including myself, because I don't want to be in that room continuously crying. I don't want her to be there crying. I want to lift her up. And thank God, Kathleen Shelrood, an amazing woman, she told me she'd get back to me in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, she was able to find some dollars with the Canadian Women's Foundation in Canada. And she's like, we found money. She's like, so what's next? It's like, let's start empowering our women to, understand where they're at. I was like, and she's like, well, what does that look like? And it's like, well, how about we go back to them and we form a group of women, and with that, we will see what they want to do and what they want to deliver on. And so we formed an anti-violence advisory team run out of that safe house. It was a challenge in itself because the staff did not want to see us succeeding, and they seen us more of a threat rather than a solution. And even though we still continue to meet, and at times we had up to 30 women presenting back to their peers in all different forms of presentations, whether that be like makes and models, license plates of vehicles, identify, you know, min it just went everywhere, how to cook on a budget, how to advocate. It was so big, it was well attended, but they seen it as a problem because now we were finding better ways and solutions on how to help ourselves exit from exploitation. So it was a challenge in itself, but I never let that really bother my ability moving forward. So I was like, okay, 2007, and in 2007, 2008, 9, and 10, I heard about a coalition of service providers meeting every month, you know, sharing amongst each other solutions that would work for those who are entrenched in exploitation, child sexual exploitation, human trafficking. And I was like, I kept bugging Kathleen. I was like, can I come to this meeting? She's like, go ahead. She's like, and she's like, come. She's like, the door was always open. I walked into that door one day, and it was so intimidating that there was about 50 executive directors sitting in that room. And I was the one coming in there that was, someone who exploited, someone that really was just small, compared to, them being executive directors or PA, like holding titles in their name. I grabbed a chair and I pulled it up. And one of the things I did was pulling that chair up, which is I invited myself to those tables because nobody else was inviting me, but Kathleen. So I went, and I always look at that door, at the exit, and it's like, I just want to run out that door, and, and sat there so quiet but so determined and so strong-willed that they cannot be making decisions on our behalf without our consent. And I sat in that meeting for up to 2 hours every month and just would feel so little. And I was sinking in my chair and I always looked at that exit. But one of the things I promised myself was never to run out that door because our voice would not be heard. So during that time, I started building relationships with those executive directors, with that community, and that coalition was called the Sexually Exploited Youth Community Coalition. It's a beautiful coalition of a lot of frontline services that work directly with sexually exploited youth, exploited peoples, and or human trafficked. And I started being welcomed and from a lot of our women, our Indigenous women that worked in that sector, not only that sector, but were working within the community. And they seen a lot that I didn't see in myself back when. And 2010, 2011 was the very first time that I shared my story. And it was a coalition that actually seen my strengths and what I can contribute to society. I didn't see those strengths. I just went in and just did what needed to be done. But they're the ones that helped me, identify my strengths. But they seen my strengths rather than my weaknesses, and they gave me an opportunity that was liberating. In 2011, actually, 10 years ago to this day, this evening, tonight, they they approached me to share my story. And I was like, I don't know how to share it. And it's like, and Kathleen again came in my life and helped me put my story together because I was everywhere. And again, she helped me narrow it all down. And, I shared my story for the very first time 10 years ago. And at that time, there was a conference called Dear John. It's rape, not a date. And I felt so liberated because now all these lawyers, all these professional people are actually paying attention to someone like me, someone who's been there. There's about 250, 300 people in that room, and all I could hear was like a pin drop. And it was liberating to share for the very first time in detail to educate them. So there's a lot of leaving out in here for the good because I don't want to traumatize you. It's Thursday, it's in the evening, but I just want to give you a picture and of pieces of my life. And I was approached from another amazing woman who just continuously walks alongside me, who again always seen my strengths and helped me identify them. Jackie Anderson, she had approached me. She was from Mama Wichita Center here, and they're an organization that really works with survivors, young victims, in bettering their lives. She had approached me and had asked me in 2010, 2011 to sit on an advisory committee designing a safe home for young, exploited youth that were victimized in exploitation and human trafficking. It was an honor to do that, an honor to build something that I didn't have as a kid and something that could have benefited me if it was available at that time. So we sat with an architect, designed the place, furnished it, bought the land, purchased the land, seen it going up in different phases, visiting the land, visiting the site, and seeing the finished outcome of Handsome Mother Earth. It was so beautiful to participate, not only participate, but include my voice, our vision, into that, and making that vision a reality. And it was created. It's a 6-bed safe home. So that was just a start of me bettering myself moving forward and giving me hope, giving me something to look forward to. And I didn't stop there. Um, you know, I, you know, we completed that. We opened it. We had a grand opening. We had a ceremony. We, housed our sisters in there, our little sisters. That actually is featured in CNN's Freedom Project. So if you ever want to view that, there's a series in the Freedom Project. So I was determined to try and go back to school, and was deteriorated and felt very, very put back from. I was told that I would be accepted for a course in Red River College, and then by the time when I got there, I was set up to speak in front of a panel, which was so intimidating. Um, and knew right away that I wouldn't have that opportunity because, there's just people there that didn't sit well with me personally. And one of the things um, I I feel like through the duration of my life that there's a lot of people that come in my life that teach me something, and they will do everything that they can to try and silence me, and not only silence me but try and banish me. So of course, victims and survivors out there, you're just going to come in contact with those folks. Don't let them deteriorate your ability of moving forward. Always do things from your heart and just continue to move forward. And that's what I did. And it really put me back a little bit because they had an opportunity at that time to help me personally, put their differences aside and move forward. And they chose not to, which, is their problem, not mine. And I continue to move forward in any which way that I can. And always use my voice and my heart and my mind and always connected those. And again, sat at those tables. I sat at those tables for many years alone as a survivor. And I was encouraged to build partnership, and not only partnership, but build an understanding from their perspective, but also help them build an understanding from my perspective, our perspective as survivors and victims, and building that piece. And through that duration, again, I always need to acknowledge Tricia's trust. Tricia Owens, the young Indigenous woman, if it wasn't for her and the province identifying her falling through the gaps and putting a trust in her name, I don't think I would be where I am today. And Tricia Owens, a young Indigenous woman who fell through cracks of the system and succeeded in suicide. So the trust has really been whitewashed, and that's one of the things you will see through the work when Indigenous people are creating something really beautiful that white people see that as a threat, and they'll come in and do whatever it takes to dismantle work. But that work is still there, or try and reintegrate that work in some way, shape, or form, and try reinventing that wheel. So, I always acknowledge that young Indigenous woman for helping me, in my life, because Tricia Owens still lives within community. She lives within me. So we built that safe home, and I was still determined that it didn't fulfill me, and that I wanted more, I needed more, we needed more as a community, and how could we do that, So we had identified a lot of ways, a lot of strategies, a lot of solutions on moving forward. And one of the solutions was we were hosting games in the city here, big games like the CFL. So what we did was we partnered with the hotel chain association in Manitoba, and started building partnership there, and building partnership behind closed doors with law enforcement, not only law enforcement but servicing agencies to service, and outreach workers to visit those hotels and, keep an eye online of the movements of victims who were being moved from point A to B, to where the money was being, following that money trail. So we had, not once but twice, came up with Buying Sex Isn't a Sport. It was a huge campaign that we partnered with a lot of service providers and a lot of community, taxi cabs. Yeah, so we partnered with them and disseminating that and bringing it to a solution. And out of that came a human trafficking hotline for the province of Manitoba that was launched. I believe that the human trafficking hotline is housed at a clinic with a K here, and is still going. So I, would just continue on working and, working behind closed doors. And one of the things that, that was really near and dear to my heart is the criminalization and institutionalization of youth. That I don't believe it's okay to criminalize and institutionalize Indigenous youth who are victimized through child sexual exploitation, human trafficking, and that's where the province was at one time. And I believe we need to give our young love from the heart rather than putting them behind closed doors or being a victim of that crime. And, through that duration of that, we started identifying that there needed to be a safe place for them to attend. And a safe place for them to attend, and there was no safe space for them. So what we did was there was survivors, some had passed on, so we were determined. We weren't really lensing in youth at that time. We were more lensing in adults. So with the help of Diane Red Sky and Ashley Gamanda, taking notes for us and putting our vision onto pen and paper and putting it onto a board for us to visualize that really helped us along our way. So after sitting in so much groups every Saturday, so we would come in from Saturday 9 a.m. to sometimes 6 4 at a Mummy site on Spence Avenue or Spence Street, and just have a little group of survivors or victims or just our sisters and brothers come and meet with a meal, an elder, and see what we can deliver. And during that time, at that time, our lens is more focused on a 24/7 for adults, but it was identified to a duration in putting our minds and hearts into that work, that there needed to be two, and it needed to be separate. So our main focus was we focused on our youth first but foremost, because they they are more victimized. And so we had put together what a 24/7 space would look like for a youth perspective, guided by survivors. And those survivors, there was myself, Mimi Brown, Tanya Chababanan, Shauna Stewart, Melissa, Jada, Rachel, Willen. Yeah, so there was survivors that would meet every Saturday and form this and what that would look like. And we got some funds from the province and the city of Winnipeg, and we opened up a 24/7 safe space in the North End at Virginia Way. And that was for a youth. It was beautiful. It was a drop in the bucket, but it was something, right? And that safe space has now turned into Tina Safe Haven. It's federally funded, that safe space. But we had identified that there's still a need, there's still a gap, and that gap needs to be mended with a solution, right? And we came back every Saturday, met, And also too, it was always led by the grandmother, who was Velma Orvis, and we would meet every Saturday, and it was beautiful because there was a community there that I loved, and we were working for all the same cause, right? And we started narrowing out what a 24/7 would look like with a wraparound approach, and it was beautiful. And we were seeking out places, and a year had passed, and Carrie Bladen also was a part of that. Carrie was a huge part of that also. So we, formed this thing. We brought in what wraparound services would look like, from what we didn't have as we were victims at that time, and what it would look like, and in the meantime, we would start building the relationship within our community, partnering and mending those services together, so that it's a full wraparound approach where people aren't on wait lists, people aren't waiting in line, or waiting a month to access the service. So we formed that, and we had applied for federal funds at that time with Donnie Kanichuk and the 595 at that time, which is the Manitoba Harm Reduction Network. And at that time, the federal government was actually putting a call out for funds, and they asked for a letter of intent. We were rejected. Lo and behold, a lot of white organizations got that funding, all that funding. And it really never stopped us from there as a collective and moving forward and trying to find a solution on how to open that place. But I knew that I needed to do other things personally, because I wasn't just admin on one thing. I needed to build and build for a future to better their lives. And I, would still be a part of the coalition, would mentor other folk and other survivors to take on that lead. And then I decided a few years ago, I'm leaving a lot of stuff out. I've been a part of a lot of stuff. Oh, yeah. So during that time before my duration, I was identified as a leader from Canada, one of 150 leaders in Canada from the federal government. And I, went to one meeting in Toronto, and a bunch of white women were trying to speak about Indigenous women and missing Indigenous women. And I had stood up with, I think it was 7 or 8 of us, Indigenous women out of those 150, stood up, and I'm like, I'm a family member, and there's family members from Nunavut. Yeah, and we gathered together, and at that time, there was a push with the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls for a reset, because things just weren't going right the way families intended it to be. And I think there's 7, 8 of us, Indigenous women, that stood up and said, no, we want to reset. We drafted a resolution within that place, but at that time, that funding from the federal funds and that identification came from Marianne Mustafa's 150 leaders leading the way in Manitoba or Canada. And it was housed at a Southern Chiefs organization. And I never stepped foot in that building ever, mind you. And I was like, okay, this is beautiful. There's only 78 women. So I was like wondering when updates were going to come, right? And I had contacted them. I was like, so what's going on? They didn't even have the heart to tell me that they had removed me from being one of those leaders because I spoke up for women. Southern Chiefs Organization, what they did was they went under direction to try undermine me. So they had spoken to a reporter and told him that I actually stole from their organization a laptop of some sort. And I was like baffled when the reporter had asked me. It's like that right there is a form of violence to Indigenous women, and it's a First Nations community. First Nations organization that holds one of my First Nations communities. So I really just left it off at that. Whatever, contact Marianne's office, and they had a different story to that. So in this work, you'll find that that happens, but don't let that deteriorate your ability in moving forward, because those are hiccups, and though you don't own those problems, right? Not once have I gotten an apology for that, mind you, but I'm not out there looking for an apology. I'm out there looking for better, right, for our peoples. So lo and behold, I walked away about three about 3 years ago from the coalition. About 4 years ago now. Before I left, I was mentoring our survivors into becoming those leaders. Sitting at those tables. I knew my time was up. Things are getting ugly. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. The shift started in Manitoba. There's a shift, and a lot of that shift had to do with government, and when government shifted, a lot of white people started crying white tears, right? And when white people cry, people listen, and that's one of the things with that. And that's when I say the trust started getting dismantled, and a lot of work was being deleted on government websites, right? So I was like, okay, I'm done with that. I'm beyond that, right? But it really hurt my heart. But I was still mentoring and helping lift up our survivors and trying to help them. And one of the things when I left them, I had met with one of the deputy ministers and assured that there was funding in place for them to be paid for their time, because all this work throughout the years I was never compensated for. I just did it because it needed to be done. And a lot of this, I call it heart medicine work. It comes from the heart. And there's times like these executive directors, I'm making like $30, $37 an hour. I was making nothing. At the end of the day, what I was making was room for others to grow. I didn't look at the dollar sign. I looked at the potential of having more leaders in our community that come from where I came from. So I walked away really broken, to be quite honest. And the National Inquiry was in town, and I shared with the National Inquiry. And I was sharing my story across Canada. I was sharing quite a bit of places and was charging a large fee, and making do with that. And I found myself in a dark place, and I became homeless again during that time. And 2 years ago, I was just in a really dark place, and I couldn't find a home, and nobody wanted to rent to me, it seemed. And I just gave everything up 2.5 years ago. And I was like, okay, it's like, I think it's time I become homeless and start all over. And I threw in the towel and became homeless, lived out of one of those carry-on bags, and went on my way. And it's something that really humbled me, because not only was I becoming homeless, I was now becoming an addict to crystal methamphetamine. It was a drug. It's after I went back to crack cocaine, and that was just too expensive. And then I went to crystal methamphetamine, to numb that pain of being homeless, and just became someone really dark, and came into a dark place in my life. And it really humbleized me, I can tell you that. I fought so long and so hard, and I needed to be humbleized, and I went that route. And I let it take its course. And, again, because one of the things is I push people away rather than push them in. And that's just how I am because of the past. But I was always assured that when that time was when I was ready, that people would always be there, walking alongside me. But I was like, no, nobody loves me. No, 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 no. Went in that route and really become full-fledged within a matter of time. And at that time, I decided I wouldn't go speak anymore, that I was done with that, and that I wanted something different. That, I just decided it wasn't, I needed to stop there. And that, I was homeless, that, da, 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 da. And I became, crystal methamphetamine drug user, and I would inject that drug into my system, and really, really did a number on myself. I'm very open with my life, and um, I believe being open will help people understand. So I had overdosed in the North End a couple years ago. Same safe house that I went to prior, and all they did was walk past me. Only one person actually called the ambulance and helped me. And at that time, I was really broken. I was so depressed. I was just so broken that, again, I left that situation. The work that I did was brokenhearted. Really, my spirit was broken, and I went into private recovery and for crystal methamphetamine. I really, really think it helped me, give me tools and helping me live life differently. Um, you know, I I have a better understanding now that I wasn't addicted to drugs. I was actually been addicted to trauma. Um, overall. But overall, I didn't just let that, define who I was as an Indigenous woman, and just continued moving forward. And through that duration and that time, I just continued to work on doing whatever needed to be done. I always gave myself to community, and I think, yeah, but prior before that, I would just give myself community. And um, like I said previously, since 2004, I've been drawing awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and that's always been something that I've done, And at the time, it wasn't so big. It was actually Take Back the Night that we would actually demonstrate our MLIWG2 expo. And I was always determined, because the night Divas had been missing was on the Take Back the Night march, and I was determined and would continuously draw attention to her, and then in 2011 became a family member directly impacted and to MIWG2S. So during that duration, I do that a lot, and I really, I really love our families, and I try and help alleviate that pain, because I know what that pain is, and one of the things is dealing with that pain twice. um, I told myself I'm really going to live in with that pain, or I'm going to find a solution out of that pain. And one of my solutions out of that pain was to help families along that journey, to help families in any capacity that I can, and where I can help, help alleviate some of that pain in their hearts, in their minds. So that's where I'm at with that. And, throughout the years, community has, you know, acknowledged me for some of that work. So in 2011 or something, I can remember, like, years just go by, but I was awarded a Human Rights Commitment Award from the Human Rights of Manitoba, for the exploitation of human trafficking. So that's just some of the work I do. I've been recently, and it was announced that I'm receiving a medal for Manitoba 150, 150 people making a difference within the community. And that's in relation to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. I want to remind those families who are watching, that is your medal. That's not mine, that's yours. That's your celebration. That's your strides. Also, too, one of the things is that 24/7 for adults is actually today. It was actually just released in a social media post that I read when I woke up from my nap after work. That place is actually now open. So it's nice to see the work that we worked on so diligently actually being brought to fruition, and to see that a lot of our women will have an extra resource to use in their daily doings, but also to remembering Velma in a good way, and also remembering Rachel for bringing up Velma and naming it Velma's house, right? And just also too, like, I forgot, I actually am one of the survivors that are on the Survivors Leadership Council of Sovereign Bodies, which is another big step for me. I enjoy my time, sitting with our sisters from across the states and being from Canada, seeing the work that's being done, and collaborating and helping connect the connection there. So I think that's where I'm at tonight. I think I went over an hour. So, one of the things I can share with you is just continue doing what needs to be done. Help in any capacity that you can, especially in the States. Yous are all new to this, that you can build off of each other and form something really beautiful. And I really admire our executive director, Anita, and the work that she does, and the work that she continuously does day in, day out while she's in school, and the staff at Seven Bodies, we lift you up. Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, Alaya. You're always just so open and so honest, and we really appreciate that. And I know that the folks listening in really appreciate that as well. Before we go into a couple questions, I wanted to remind folks who are listening, we do have posted a few hotlines that you can reach out to if, the conversation today has you feeling triggered or reminders of your own situation. Please do reach out if you need help. So I have a couple questions for you. And the first is, what advice would you give to someone who suspects that a loved one might be in a dangerous situation?
Some advice I would give is listen. Listen with an open heart and open ears. Um, Listen from a place of love. Listen and a place of love and understanding, and don't try and put your bitterness or betterness in it. Just listen. Overall, really listen, because you can become one of those people that they actually come to for safety. Not only come to for safety, but will share some very critical, information with, and see you as that safety net person.
You. So what is your advice for survivors who want to tell their story but are scared to do so?
It's very scary. Tonight, I haven't shared my story in a couple of years. It's scary. Don't rush it. I looked at when I first started. I was like, how do I do this? I was writing like a memoir, of my life, and I was like, well, this is like going to be a book, and just like two baby steps, because you're one of the things what I did was I started writing. So I did was like where I could remember from, but where I could remember from was I was opening up a lot of trauma. I was opening up a lot of trauma that was undealt with. And one of the things as a victim and a survivor is we have trauma blockers And we can release trauma when we're really looking into our lives in that format of trying to tell our stories. We can release a lot of trauma, and unblock a lot of trauma. So really be cautious and take a lot of time with yourself and share only what you want to share overall, because you got to remember there's an audience, right? There's an audience on the other side, on the delivering side, and guaranteed out of that audience, you're going to have someone coming forward as someone whom is a survivor, who was a victim, guaranteed. And every time that I've shared my story, that always has occurred. But overall, take good care of your spirit, and know your limits. And you don't have to do it all in one day in telling your story. You can do it in different stages of where you feel comfortable. But overall, when you tell your story, it's liberating. It's very liberating. And not only that, to those survivors and victims watching out there, I lift each and every one of you up collectively.
Yes. Thank you. So one of our listeners says that they work for a newspaper and they want to know what they can do better to share these stories and raise awareness.
The language is important. Language is one of the things that was really difficult in the province here of Manitoba, was the language that media uses. So being very aware and trauma informed in the way you're telling your story, or telling the story for your audience, but not only telling your story, but telling the story of the survivor or the victim, where you're not victimizing them anymore, but where you're lifting them up, right? And one of the things with like media, right? Media have a big role to play in telling the story, right? Media have a big role to play in how they tell that story, right? So, for example, I hate to use these monsters' names, right? Weinstein, for example, the media jumped on him rather than lifting up the victims of that monster, right? So they rather like, oh, he's rich, he's famous, da 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 da. No, well, what about these women? What about these women, that come forward? We believe you, we honor you, we walk with you, nothing like that came out of that for years. Telling the story in a different narrative, telling the story in a different narrative, and actually putting yourself aside from how your network wants to tell that story for money purposes, right? By actually wanting to understand what we actually really go through, because there's a lot of trauma that we hold within ourselves that we don't really tell, right? So language is very important. For me, sorry, I just need to remove that. So language, instead of using sex worker, so I have a hard time with that. Sorry. So I have a hard time with that. I'm actually getting a lot of notifications on my phone, but what is that? But anyways, I have a hard time with that word, right? A sex worker, because there's no employment in being a victim. There's no employment there. There's no, empowerment there. For me, anyways. It could be for someone that are still entrenched in that and they feel empowered in that. But I understand that. I totally understand. But for me, there was no empowerment there. In telling the story, for example, they used to use in the province of Manitoba young prostitutes, right? We don't use that language anymore. We use sexually exploited youth, or if they're AWOL from their organization or group home, that they're a kid at risk. I call them, someone whom is a targeted child in need of protection. Sorry, someone is calling in. Hello? Can you see me? Sorry.
You're
Are
good.
we still there?
Yep.
Someone calling in.
No.
But yeah, so just really understanding the fact that you don't want to paint them anymore with this brush of victimizing them, right? Rather, we need to start lifting them up as they tell their stories and when they come and tell their stories.
Thank you. Yeah, and if there's one more thing I can add is just really the importance of consent and really decision-making authority. So that is a practice at SBI and all of our publications. If we are interviewing survivors, we always give the publication to them first to give them kind of the first yes or no on that issue. And so that's a really practical, easy way to be trauma informed.
I think also to add on to that. So when networks want to come and interview victims or survivors, is actually going to their chain of command and asking, well, what supports do we have to support those sharing their stories? Because again, at the end of the day, you're opening worms that you want to honor those worms prior, before, and after they share their stories, and honor them in a good way, right? Where they're actually using self-care, a self-care module practice in that. So yeah.
Well, and that's so important in our Indigenous communities because it's that principle of reciprocity, that you couldn't write that story without the survivor giving you the expertise that they have. And so it's absolutely important to honor that expertise and take care of your survivors. So the last question that I have for you, can you talk about why survivor leadership is so important and what does it look like?
Survivor leadership is crucially important in anything that you do relating to survivors. You cannot say, oh, well, I'm going to put a scholar there that have not ever experienced what a survivor has, but say they are poster child, right? It's not going to work. It's important because not only are you lifting up one survivor, but you're lifting up hundreds alongside them, and that's one of the important piece for myself. After all of this, right? So I still have those women that I talked about in my story, right? That seen my strengths and continue to see my strengths. So I work in government now. After all of that, my back life is my day job is working in government, and it shows you, right? Because I've been lifted up, and I continuously lifted up every day from women that see potential in me, and they see what I can offer. And it's just important to have survivors at the forefront of anything that you're doing in relation to survivors. And you always have to have their expertise and knowledge attached to that.
Thank you. So that is the end of our questions. Before we go, are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Again, sorry, I'm getting a call in. Sorry. I just want to get you guys to all stand up. All stand up and just wrap one arm around yourself like this and just hug yourselves, because you just listened to something really heavy, and that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, And also to those victims out there that just, that a lot of this has been like, hey, I want to lift you up, feel comfortable on reaching out to the numbers that are going to be provided. To those service providers that are listening, reach out to Seven Bodies, and if you want some work to be done. Overall, thank you for listening to me, and take really good care of your hearts. And I lift each and every one of you up tonight. Thank you, Sweetwatch.
Thanks so much, Alaya. So yes, that's the end of our session tonight. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in. Keep an eye out for our next webinar, and we'll catch you next time.